To the best of my knowledge, Yosef HaTzadik is not mentioned at all in the Haggadah. In fact, even Moshe Rabbeinu, who played a major role, is omitted in the Haggadah, but certainly Yosef. But the purpose of this essay that we want to study is to bring Yosef, resurrect him from the dead, and bring him like right there into the middle of the Haggadah. And this is all based on a medrash that the entire Golus of Mitzrayim was a punishment for Mechiras Yosef. And once Yosef was sold to Mitzrayim, his job, Yosef, was to prepare the groundwork for the Shvatim and for Yaakov Avinu to come down to Mitzrayim. And the pasuk says, "Vayoshev Yosef es aviv es achiv, vayitein lehem achuza be'eretz Mitzrayim b'meitav haaretz v'chalkel Yosef es aviv ves echav lechem lefi ataf." So Yosef comes down to Mitzrayim, and we know how he rose the political echelon, and he brings his father and his brothers an achuza, a certain like settlement in Eretz Mitzrayim, the best of the land, in Goshen, and he supports them, men, women, and children, during the time of the great famine. So everything begins, the entire Mitzrayim exile begins with Mechiras Yosef. And not only that, but Yosef apparently plays a role in Geula Mitzrayim, in the process of redemption. And this is based on Vayikra Rabbah. It says in the name of Rab Pinchas, in the name of Chia, Gan Na'ul, which is a pasuk in Shir Hashirim, something that's locked away. And this has to do with erva, with arayos, with the protection to avoid any gili arayos. And according to this particular approach in the Medrash, the reason why Klal Yisrael merited the geula, the redemption, is dafka because of this, which means because of Gan Na'ul, that they abstained from any sort of Gili Arayos. And where did they learn it from? Like, where were these vibes of tznius? Where did they emanate from? And it's from Yosef, because Yosef down to Mitzrayim was Gadar Atzum Erva, the whole mice of Ashes Potifar, and Nidgiru Yisrael Bizchusa. Nigdaru, interesting grammatical form. The noun is Geder. Geder means to create a fence. And the verb is Ligdar, meaning to set up fences. And the people of Israel merited the redemption because they set up fences, Nigdaru. And this was all under the influence, or shall we say the inspiration, of Yosef. I don't know that the Jewish people necessarily knew about this. I'm more inclined to think that the impact of Yosef and the inspiration that he projected to the Jewish nation was something metaphysical. But he says that Yosef would be the one to bring about that spiritual level, that righteousness that would ultimately merit Yitzias Mitzrayim, the Gula from Mitzrayim. So on the one hand, it's the Mechira of Yosef, that terrible, catastrophic sin that brought about the Golus to Mitzrayim. But on the other hand, in many different ways, the entire Mitzrayim experience was all a result of Yosef, whether it's the support that Yosef gives to his family, setting them up in the finest, choicest land in Mitzrayim. But more than that, it's Yosef's impact on Klal Yisrael in this area of sexual of tznius. That's going to guarantee and bring about the merit of Geula. And this leads us to the following question. If Yosef plays such an important role within the context of Golus Mitzrayim and the survival of the Jewish nation in Mitzrayim, and in terms of the spiritual merit for the Geula in Mitzrayim, then why isn't Yosef given even a footnote in the Haggadah? And the answer is Karpas. So, John, you weren't here before. We discussed the mitzvah of Achilas Karpas according to the Rambam. As a separate mitzvah, requires kizayis, requires tibul b'charoses, requires that every member of the household should eat a kizayis karpas. But now we're looking at karpas from a whole different perspective. We have two tibulim of a yerek on the night of Seder. We have the first yerek, which tibul rishon doesn't have to be morar, it could be any yerek. And then we have tibul sheni, which is the morar in the charoses. The Maril, one of the pillars of Ashkenazic Psak, I think we're going back almost 600 years ago, he writes that in contrast to the Rambam, who says carte blanche, take any yerek for Tibul Rishon, doesn't matter which yerek, he says dafka to take karpas, which I think is loosely translated as parsley. And the very famous symbol of the Maril, of Karpas, is that if you read the word Karpas backwards, that's called a mafreya, you'll have Samach, which is a separate letter, and then you have Hey Reish Chaf, moving backwards, which is Parach. So now it slips my mind for a second. What was the Samach? Anybody remember? It slips my mind. Maybe it's Sivlosam, maybe. Samach stands for Sivlosam. Right, it says by Moshe Rabbeinu Vayar bis Sivlosam. And then Parach is the Avodas Parach, the backbreaking work in the slavery of the Jewish people. So Maril wants us to take for the first tibul not potatoes and not celery and not carrots, bananas, I don't know, whatever you want to take. But he wants karpas because there's meaning in the word and the name karpas. And Rabbeinu Manoach, who wrote a super commentary on the Rambam, writes that the minig is likach karpas. Again, he has a different reason why we take karpas, and that's the reason that we want to study today. And that's Rabbeinu Manoach in Perek Ches Milchus Chavetz Matzah Halacha Beis. Lefi, this is on page 121. Sheyesh bo zecher l'ksones pasim. Karpas Pasim. Shasa Yaakovinu Yosef. And you remember the brothers were jealous of the Ketonis Pasim. They stripped him of the Ketonis Pasim. And after they shechted the eggs, then they dipped the Ketonis Pasim in blood. Ubisibasa, and this was the first cause of the Golus of Mitzrayim, because the jealousy of the Ketonis Pasim on the part of the brothers brought about the Mechiras Yosef, which ultimately will bring to the Yerida LeMitzrayim. So he quotes here the Ben Ish Chai in Parshas Tzav. He says, why do we take karpas and dip it in vinegar or salt water? It's because the dipping, are you listening? We're both saying this is very important. I mean, maybe you know this. I never knew this. The dipping itself, the tibul, corresponds to the tibul of the achim of the Ketonis Pasim in Dam. And where do we see this in the word karpas? Says the Ben Ish Chai. Take the first two letters, chaf resh, and those are the last two letters of mochar, of sold. Now you're left with pei samach, which are the first two letters of pasim. Mamish wild. So they sold Yosef because of the Ketonis Pasim. They took the Ketonis Pasim, the brothers, and they dipped it in dam. And we do a tibul, in a sense, to rectify that original tibul that led to the entire 210 years of Golus and Mitzrayim. So what's fascinating now is that, this shines a whole new light, sheds a whole new light on tibul. We thought tibul was just a kera for the children. Why are you dipping something in chometz or mei melach? We didn't even start the Suda yet, and then there's going to be another tibul, halayla zeh shtei pa'amim. But now we're giving tibul an independent significance. Inherently, has nothing to do with kidei sheyishlu atinokos at this point. But rather, the tibul is a kapara for the tibul of the Ketonis Pasim of the brothers that led to the sale and ultimately the Golus in Mitzrayim. And all this is hinted at in the word karpas. Kar and pas. Kar meaning mecher, and pas meaning pas. Now he quotes the Abarbanel in Parshas Lech Lecha. Golus Mitzrayim ba be'itya shel sinas ha'achim es Yosef sinas chino. The entire exile of Mitzrayim was brought about in the aftermath or in the footsteps of the hatred of the brothers to Yosef. And he calls it sinas chino. And it's that hatred and jealousy that brought the brothers to throw Yosef down into the bar and eventually to bring him up from the bar and sell him down to Mitzrayim. And the punishment, what we call midah keneged midah, is they caused the Yerida to Mitzrayim, and therefore they should also go down to Mitzrayim. So it means that Yosef was an Eved in Mitzrayim, and as punishment, we, the Jewish people, we become Avodim to Paro in Mitzrayim. And they took Yosef and they threw him into a bar, and that is a Maisa called Hashlocha, to throw, to cast. Where do we find a Midah Keneged Midah that in Mitzrayim there would also be a punishment of Hashlocha? Kol ben ha'ilod ela ye'ora tashlichu. They threw Yosef in the bar, and the male children would be thrown into the Yar, into the Yar, into the Nile. But the scary thing, the depressing thing about this whole thing is that the Jewish people never really achieved full atonement for that terrible sin of Mechiras Yosef. And we see this on Yom Kippur with regard to the Asara Haruge Malchus. And I think it's called Eila Esker, if I'm not mistaken, but it's based on a Yalkut. That the Midas Hadin is still to this day punishing us for Mechiras Yosef. And that's going to be why we don't wear shoes on Yom Kippur. Why did Hashem allow the destruction of the 10 great Tanoim? It's because of Mechiras Yosef on the part of 10 Shvat, meaning Yosef wasn't part and Binyamin wasn't there. Wow. Seems like there are 10 tzaddikim in every generation that are taken away. Vadayin also chet tolu. And despite all the suffering and the martyrdom in every generation since the time of the Asaruge Malchus, the chet is still hovering over our heads. And therefore, the Navi says in Amos, Kamar Hashem al Shlosha Pishe Yisrael al Barlo Shivenu. Al Mochram Bekesef Tzadik the Evyon Bavur Nalayin. What do they get in return for the sale of Yosef? The brothers received a pair of shoes. And the Navi testifies that Al Arba Lo Ashivenu, like as if to say there's no complete atonement for that fourth sin, namely the sin of Mechiras Yosef. And the Yalkut says, Mikevan Mechuvan al Mechiras Yosef Shemachras Yosef Shmeilim Esrim Kesef. The Torah testifies that they received 20 kesef for the sale of Yosef, and that's the amount of money it takes to buy a pair of shoes. Each one of the 10 would receive 2 coins, whatever coins they were at that time, which were enough to buy a pair of shoes. So every one of the 10 Shvatim that participated in the sale of Yosef was able to reap the benefit of a pair of shoes. And therefore, in the period of Eila Eskara, recited by Ashkenazic Jews in the Musaf service on the Day of Atonement, the Paiton, the liturgist, describes and depicts how the Sar, that officer in the Roman court fills the entire palterin with nalayim. It's like a flood of shoes in the palace. V'kara l'asrei malchus michachmei Yisrael v'sholom ma dino shel ish hagonev nefesh me'echav mibnei Yisrael v'is amer bo umechara. And what did the Chachamim respond? Umeis haganav hahu. You steal someone, you kidnap someone, you sell them as an eved, that's a capital crime. Amalem avosechem, asher achichem machru, liorchas yishmelim sachru, ubiad na'alaim nesanu, ve'atem tisu avon avosechem. Wow. There's a piyut called Eila Ezkara, in which the Python has a whole poem about the fact that the Asar Aruche Malchus would be taken away and punished for the sin of their forefathers. Now, I need your help here, if you can, to Google Divrei Yosef. I'm curious to know who the Divrei Yosef is, because this entire essay, I think, is built on what we're about to learn here in this short paragraph on page 122 in the name of the Divrei Yosef. In the footnote, he writes Rav Yosef Cohen, but I don't know anything about him. He says that there are others who came up with the same idea, that on Yom Kippur we don't wear shoes, because ein kateger nasa saneger. Shoes are a kateger. They come in front of the kisei of the Bezdin Shalmala with a kitrug for a pair of shoes you sold your brother. So we'd rather go barefoot on Yom Kippurim, just like the Kohen Gadol doesn't wear big day Zav because it reminds of Chet HaEgel, so too we don't want to wear shoes on Yom Kippurim because it reminds of the Mechiras Yosef for a pair of shoes. I mean, again, I never knew this. You gentlemen knew this, and you didn't tell me. Moshe Rabbeinu gets the command, this is at the end of footnote number 15, Shal na'alcha me'al raglecha. Kutzuk l'bal l'leches pino alayim. Moshe Rabbeinu is not allowed to wear shoes. Kedei shelo lahazkir chet mechiras Yosef. When Hashem is trying to remind Moshe Rabbeinu that we're at the end of the period of Golus, as if to say Golus Mitzrayim is enough of a punishment, and now we're ready to move on to the state of Geula. Take off your shoes. Because if I'm going to appoint you as the Redeemer of Israel, then we don't want any categoria, no prosecution. The shoes remind Hashem, Kaviyachol, of the sin that brought about the ultimate Golus in Mitzrayim. And now it's time to turn the corner. I want to appoint you, Moshe, as the Gol Shal Yisrael. Take off your shoes, because Ein Kateger Nasa Saneger. And there's a Haggadah called the Ma'aseh Hashem from Rabbi Eliezer Ashkenazi. I think I own a copy of it, I'm not sure. That on the night of Pesach, we have to start with Gnus. Maschil b'Gnus u'Mesayim b'Shvach. And Gnus means to understand what was the sin that ultimately brought about the Yerid of Klal Yisrael in Mitzrayim. And that's the Shnei Tibulim. Where's the Maschil b'Gnus? Because the Tibul Rishon before the Suda is Keneged Vayitbelu as Aksones Padam. The 10 brothers dipped the Ksones into Dam after stripping it off their brother Yosef. However, there's a second tibul, which indicates that turning point from the first tibul, which is Keneged Vayitbulus Ksonis Apasim, that's the kategor, that's the Maschil Bignus, understanding the first cause of Golus, Mitzrayim, and now we're turning the corner towards Geula. We are wearing our shoes on this night. And that's the second tibul. What is that Keneged? That's Keneged the tibul of skipping over the Jewish firstborn. V'tavaltem b'dam asher basaf v'gatem el hamashkuf. That we slaughter the korban pesach and we take the dam, and with a dipping in the dam, we put the dam on the mashkov, and God saves the Jewish people. So the first tibul is karpas. And as we said before, karpas has the samach and then the parach, avodas parach. Oh, he says that the samach, not the way I said it, is sevel, but keneged shishim ribu. And which shishim ribu? It's the shishim ribu sha'ovdu b'parach, which takes us back to karpas, samach, meaning shishim ribu parach. But the tefillah b'dam, hoisa b'agudos ezov, says the Ben Ish Chai, this is a remez for achdus and anova, right? Aguda means we're all together as one, and that's the unity. This is going to be the tikkun. And the ezov is as anova, the exact opposite of what the brothers did to their own brother Yosef. So the second tibul, again, we have to figure out why it's Mora, why it's Charosis. I mean, that's a whole different discussion. But the second tibul is going to be a tikkun to rectify the sin of Mechiras Yosef. And that's the second tibul, which corresponds to V'tavaltem b'dam asher basaf in Agudas Ezov. And all this, says the Ben Ish Chai, is a remez to the Achdus, the Anovelis Saken Chet Mechiras Yosef, as a rectification of the sin of selling Yosef. Again, there's a lot more here, Rabosai, but we covered, I think, 3 out of the 4 pages, so we'll stop here. And appreciate your patience. I hope you got something out of it. I mean, to me, this is like brand new, a whole different perspective on what goes on the night of Seder, the Karpas V'tibul Rishon, and Dafka Karpas, as we saw in the Maril, and the second tibul, and we'll see how it connects to Charoses, but the second tibul is the tikkun of the chet of Mechiras Yosef. Keneged v'tavaltem b'dam. Okay then, thank you so much, and wish you a great day. Thank you so much.